Alright. This is one of those not gameplay videos, so if you guys only like the gameplay, feel free to not watch this. You may not have noticed, but I am behind on the how to pilot Rug Delver against X matchup videos, which I actually don't even know if you guys like, but I said I was going to do them on Reddit, or at least I said I was going to do something of that sort on Reddit, so I do plan on doing it unless you guys straight up say you hate them, in which case I'm probably not going to do them. But anyways, I am behind, and since X-Mage is acting up and I got disconnected a couple matches in a row, this seems like a really good time to catch up. This is probably coming in after the updated 75 with Not My Deck list matches start, introduced with the Grixis Shadow one, but I plan on using my list because I know it pretty much in and out, so this video will probably run a lot more smoothly with it, and I can talk about when you want Shoal, when you don't want Shoal, which I think is a pretty decent thing to know, especially for those who want to run Shoal. So let's dig in. The first on the list is Storm. Storm is conveniently your bread and butter combo deck. Storm seeks to assemble a critical mass of cards and then beat you in one shot. Their deck is basically composed of enablers and payoff cards, where pretty much every card is technically an enabler, and then the payoff is Empty the Warrens and Grape Shot. Technically, I would call not Gifts Ungiven. I'd say Gifts Ungiven is more of an enabler, but I would say Past in Flames is also a payoff card, although it's sort of like it's in between the enablers and the payoffs, because you do usually have to ritual up to it, and you basically need to get a critical mass of stuff in your graveyard for it to do anything. So it sort of needs to be enabled, but it also enables the engine, so it's somewhere in between. But basically, you have enablers and payoff cards, just like any other combo deck. Sometimes they can go off with just the pseudo-enablers of cantrip, ritual, do some stuff, spend some mana, get some cards, make some mana, and then basically cast a bunch of spells, storm you. But usually those kills are pretty rare, and you most likely are being killed by Goblin Electromancer or Brawl into bunch of spells, bam, you're dead. As opposed to, that can happen as early as turn 3. I think they can technically do it on turn 2, but I haven't seen it. Usually that happens around turn 3, undisrupted, although I'm sure they could fizzle with at least a decent chance. But to kill without the enablers, they need like turn 4 or 5, and I think there's more variance to those kills. So basically it's just like a combo deck. Take out the enabler and you're usually pretty good. Storm is a little special in that sometimes you can just take out the payoff card against Tronsei, which I'll be talking about shortly, so this is actually really convenient because it's already in my head. Against Tron, sometimes you can just counter their Karn or their Ugin, and you don't have to worry about being unable to counter their Sylvan Scrying because you tapped out for a Goyf. Against Storm, good luck countering Grape Shot. Unless, of course, you boarded in Counterflux, but I mean, that's probably a one of in your 75, and you almost certainly don't have access to it game 1. But anyways, enablers, payoff cards. You want to deal with the enablers, not the payoff cards. Sometimes you can deal with payoff cards. This is not one of those times where you want to aim your disruption at the payoff. Just take out the enablers. And of course, clock them. Fortunately, that's what Rug Delver is designed to do. So the Storm matchup is actually, I think, very, very good. I would say it's very favorable. If you were to say very favorable, favorable, even, unfavorable, very unfavorable as your scale, because there's no way I want to use percentages. I have no quantitative data, and I don't want to spew anything like that. So I would call it very favorable. Clocks. These 12 cards are your clocks that you want to hit sooner rather than later. Ideally, you're going to play one of these on turn 1 or 2, and then you're going to hit them a bunch of times while countering and killing their important stuff. Knuckleblade isn't great here because it comes down on turn 3 at the earliest, and you have to tap out to do that. So if you don't have a Shoal in hand, Knuckleblade makes you take turn 3 off, which doesn't seem great. Snapcaster Mage I like because it lets you flash back your disruption, and it also can theoretically add to your clock. So if they play an enabler, you're going to kill it right away. No questions asked, basically, almost every time. If you have a clock that you could play, you might want to play that clock, but you almost always want to take out their enabler, because when Storm has an enabler and even a decent hand, they're threatening to kill you when they untap. So you want that dead. Tarfire and Forked Bolt are a little unfortunate in that they can't kill Baral, who is a relatively new addition to Storm, but I guess not that new. They only deal 2 damage, so they can't kill a 3 toughness creature. That's why Lightning Bolt is pretty noticeably the best burn spell in the list against Storm. If you are up against an Electromancer and you have both Bolt and one of the bolts 5 to 6, you want to use Forked Bolt or Tarfire to take out that Electromancer so that you still have Bolt in your hand for the Brawl. I don't mind Dismembering in this matchup because Storm rarely goes for your life total in a fair way. Usually if you're dead at least 1.5 times, so the 4 life isn't very relevant. I also fetch Shock pretty aggressively if it's going to help me clock and disrupt. So that could add up, but you just have to be cognizant of it, and you can be pretty liberal with your fetching and your dismembering. Vapor Snag isn't great, but it can slow them down a turn. And if they have a really small empty, you can bounce a token, which probably isn't relevant. I'm pretty sure they sideboard into a Madcap Experiment Platinum Imperium package sometimes, but I'm not sure, so please don't quote me on that. I suppose there's some value in Vapor Snag there, but I don't think there's much. So on their enabler specifically, you want to take out the cost reducer because that accelerates them a lot. And something I really like doing when it comes down to what spells do you counter, because Storm is mostly spells and you're going to want to counter some of them, I like countering Manamorphose. Manamorphose is basically the best ritual in the deck because it doesn't produce mana, but it draws them a card. And Storm needs mana and cards to kill you. They need to make mana and then make cards, or make cards then make mana. So I like targeting... When you take out a Manamorphose, you target both axes, which is nice. If you counter all of their rituals, they won't have the mana to go off. If you counter all of their cantrips, they won't have enough cards to go off unless they Past in Flames. Taking out Manamorphose lets you sort of do both, which is why if they ever gifts for a bunch of rituals, I pretty much always put Manamorphose in the graveyard, because that's just one fewer Manamorphose they get to cast. Even if they Past in Flames it, that means they get it once instead of twice, and I like that. I like that a lot. So you counter Manamorphose. Countering Gifts Ungiven is pretty obviously a good thing, because that basically gets them 4 to 6 cards because of their flashback shenanigans. So that's a pretty good one to counter. Sometimes you can even denial it without having a fatty on board, which is nice for those starts that just have a transformed Delver clocking away. Disrupting Shoal I like here. I like it quite a bit because it can counter Manamorphose or, say... I can't believe I just blanked on Baral and Electromancer's names for that second. That's kind of bad given that I just said them, but anyways. Shoal for 2 is really good in this matchup. Shoal for 2 is of course harder for us to hit than Shoal for 1. But you can also Shoal for 1 a Serum Visions or a Sleight of Hand, so it's not useless having Shoal on 1. Maybe you Shoal a Bolt that would take out your Delver, which is clocking, so that's somewhat relevant as well. I think Shoal is a pretty good card here because When Storm combos off, usually it threatens to do so quickly. So if you have Shoal, sometimes you can clock and disrupt and sort of cheat on mana that way by giving up cards, the way Shoal lets you do. Traverse is pretty okay here because it lets you hit your land sooner, which means less stumbling. Storm is like Delver in that it punishes people when they stumble. If you don't have the removal for their cost reducer, or you go 10 turns without clocking them, you're going to eventually lose. So usually you want to be hitting your land drops, at least the first couple, maybe up to 3, and Traverse lets you do that. I believe that's pretty much it for general stuff, so let's look at sideboarding. We don't have a lot of stuff for Storm. With Izzet Staticaster now in the 75, this hasn't been for a while, I think you might bring it in. Spell Snare is also pretty new because Nux just came here. I like Spell Snare. I don't like the rejections because they're not running colorless stuff. EE could be good, but it's also quite slow, so maybe, maybe not. I don't want Grudge, but I could theoretically see Revelry coming in if you're afraid of hate cards. Blood Moon is awful here because they're a 2-color deck that can produce mana with spells and plays Blood Moon itself. Vapor Snag doesn't have a lot of targets. Like I said, Staticaster's a possibility. I like Pyroclasm, and I don't like Huntmaster because it's just way too slow. So I'm definitely boarding in at least these two, probably both Pyroclasm, maybe the Staticaster. EE is probably next, and then maybe the Revelry. I'm going to assume we're going with these 4 because they're the ones I think you're most likely to bring in. We have a lot of ways of disrupting things that EE would deal with, so I don't think you really want that. Staticaster, I think, might be a bit better than EE here because it lets you hold up disruption and then play Staticaster to proactively disrupt. But at the same time, besides taking out Empty the Warrens, all it's going to do is team up with a less than good burn spell to take out a Brawl, so maybe Staticaster's bad too. Savage Knuckleblade is new to the deck, and it is definitely something I would cut in this matchup. It's probably just too slow and too mana intensive. I like cutting a Snapcaster Mage. I know I said they're good. They are. They're also kind of slow. If you have multiple Snapcaster Mages, you can be in trouble, and I really want these Delvers to flip, transform, if you will, if you don't like people using the Kamigawa flip mechanic to describe transform. Snapcaster Mage, if you have 2, sometimes you just can't clock, and they do get mana intensive sometimes. And back to the clocking thing, you can go bolt your Brawl, leak your Brawl, I don't know, snap bolt something, say an Electromancer, snap leak your Manamorphose, and if you didn't clock, eventually Storm will draw its critical massive stuff and you will die. So you need to clock. I also like cutting a Traverse because you do want to hit your land drops, but the game will slow down a touch, and we are cutting some higher curve stuff, so I think that's fine. I would bring these 3 in. Let's throw them right here. No, that's not great. Let's put them next to the Shoals. And it's also very important when you sideboard, if you do keep Shoal, you want to make sure that Shoal is still good. We cut a 2 CMC blue card, which kind of hurts a little bit, but I think I'd rather do that than have the Snapcaster Mage. We're also bringing in Spell Snare, which makes having Shoal for 2 a little less relevant. And we do have Shoal for 1 in spades. I like Pyroclasm here, so maybe you don't bring in Staticaster. I don't actually know. Staticaster is one of those cards I haven't played much with, but I think this is a pretty conservative way of boarding against them, and it's probably fine. If you do pack Graveyard Hate, I usually don't. You probably want to bring that in, because that can hit them very, very hard. You turn off their Past in Flames, and their Gifts Ungiven, for the most part. You just give them the 2 worst cards, and then exile the 2 better ones, and that seems pretty good. So Graveyard Hate, of course, is powerful against Storm. I think I would go for surgical extraction if I got to choose, because like I said, the life total isn't super relevant. It's an instant, and it costs 0 mana. So those are all things I like against Storm. I could also see other Graveyard Hate being at least okay though, probably even good. If I had it in my board, I would bring it in. Oh, I don't want Vapor Snag. There you go. So one of these 3 cards also can come in, because I'm not keeping Vapor Snag. Dismember is a worse bolt in that it doesn't hit the face, but it does deal with their enablers, and if you keep those off the table, usually you're in very good shape. So I think you keep the Dismember. The Snag I would take out because it's just a temporary fix. So these 3 basically would come down to, are you worried about Empty the Warrens and being able to hold up your Disruption? Are you worried about, I guess, enchantments, possibly artifacts? These 2 kind of go hand in hand because they both deal with that. EE lets you deal with Warrens at a bit of a bigger cost than Staticaster because you have to play it up front. But to be fair, you're playing it for 0. EE does have the added benefit of taking out their Electromancers and their Brawls, but that costs 4 mana, so that's a bit slow. I think I might say I'd go with the Staticaster, but I don't actually know. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video about how to pilot Rug Delver against Gifts Storm. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Also, feel free to leave me feedback on these as to whether or not you like them, think they're helpful, and how I could theoretically improve them.